once upon a time, in the village of Ufumaka. The moon hung low, its silver light weaving through the tall palm trees that lined the village paths. Obinna walked alone, the sound of his footsteps swallowed by the thick night air. He carried a basket of yams from his farm, yet his mind was heavy with thoughts far darker than the night itself. It had happened again. Another woman, a sweet, lively seamstress named Chika, lay bedridden, her once bright eyes now sunken and dull. It had been weeks since she had smiled, and the village whispered that her sickness began the night she and Obinna had shared laughter by the river. Ekwensu is at work, the old women muttered, shaking their heads. Obinna's heart clenched. He wanted to deny it, to insist that he was just an unlucky man. But deep inside, he knew. The shadows that lingered in his dreams, the cold touch on his skin when no one was near, they were signs of something he dared not name. As he approached his hut, a chilling wind swept through the village, rustling the banana leaves. Obinna paused. The air smelled of something sweet and unnatural, like overripe fruit. He turned sharply, his eyes scanning the empty path behind him. Then he heard it, a soft, melodious voice, like a song carried by the breeze. Obinna. He froze. It was her voice. Amina. She appeared before him, stepping out of the shadows like a figure from a dream. Her skin glowed faintly, her flowing white gown rippling as though caught in an unseen current. Her beauty was otherworldly, yet her eyes burned with a cruel intensity that made his blood run cold. "Why do you run from me?" she asked, her voice both gentle and menacing. "Have I not given you everything?" Obinna's mouth went dry. "Leave me be, Amina," he whispered. "I never asked for this." "But you accepted it," she said, her lips curving into a smile. "You are mine, Obinna. And anyone who dares to take you from me will pay the price." As she spoke, a sudden gust of wind extinguished the lantern hanging by Obinna's door. The darkness swallowed her figure, leaving only the echo of her laughter. Inside his hut, Obinna collapsed onto his mat, his body trembling. He knew he could no longer ignore the truth. If he didn't find a way to break free from Amina, her wrath would consume not just him, but everyone he loved. Obinna barely slept that night. The shadows in his hut seemed to move, whispering secrets only his ears could hear. By dawn, he resolved to seek answers. The village elder, Na Ukwo, was known for his wisdom and connection to the spirit world. If anyone could help, it was him. As the rooster crowed, Obinna walked to the elder's compound, his heart heavy with fear and hope. Na Ukwo sat under the great irako tree, his white beard flowing like a river down his chest. He was grinding herbs in a wooden bowl, his movements deliberate and calm. "Obinna, my son," the elder said without looking up. "I felt your footsteps before you arrived. The spirits have been restless." Obinna knelt before him, lowering his head. "Na Ukwo, I need your guidance. I am plagued by a spirit, a woman who claims to be my wife. She brings misfortune to any woman who comes near me." The elder stopped grinding and looked at Obinna, his eyes sharp and knowing. "A spiritual wife," he murmured. "These bonds are not made lightly. Tell me, Obinna, do you remember when this began?" Obinna hesitated. Memories from his childhood surfaced, blurry and fragmented. "When I was a boy, my parents took me to the river shrine of Ani, the earth goddess. They said it was to protect me, to ensure I would have a good life. But I was too young to understand. Na Aqua nodded, his expression grave. The river shrine is a sacred place, but it is also a place of bargains. Your parents may have sought blessings for you, but they bound you to a spirit in the process. This Obinna is not just any spirit, she is powerful and possessive. Breaking such a bond will not be easy. Obinna clenched his fists. I cannot live like this, Na Aqua. I want to be free. I want to love without fear. The elder rose slowly, his staff tapping the ground. Then you must prepare yourself. The path to freedom is not without danger. You will need the help of the spirits, but they do not grant favors freely. Are you willing to face whatever lies ahead? Yes, Obinna said firmly, though his voice wavered slightly. I will do whatever it takes. Na Aqua nodded and gestured for Obinna to follow him into a small hut filled with ancient artifacts, animal skulls, carved statues, and jars of strange powders. He took a bundle of dried leaves and threw them into a clay pot over a fire. The room filled with a pungent smoke that made Obinna's eyes water. Close your eyes, the elder instructed. You must see what binds you to Obinna. Obinna obeyed, and almost immediately, the smoke seemed to pull him into a trance. He saw himself as a child, standing by the river with his parents. A priestess in a red wrapper chanted over him, holding a bowl of river water mixed with blood. She poured the liquid onto his head, and the river began to glow. Out of the water emerged Obinna, her beauty mesmerizing even then. She smiled and reached out, placing her hand on his chest. You are mine now, her voice echoed. The vision shifted. Obinna saw flashes of the years that followed, his family prospering, their farm yielding abundant harvests, and his parents often making offerings at the river. But with every blessing, the bond with Obinna grew stronger. The vision ended abruptly, and Obinna gasped, collapsing onto the floor. You were given to her in exchange for wealth, Na Aqua said, his voice heavy. Your parents likely thought the bond would only last during your childhood. But spirits like Obinna do not let go easily. What can I do? Obinna asked, his voice trembling. The elder handed him a small, carved figure of a woman. This is an ikna, a symbol of personal strength and determination. You must carry it with you on your journey. To break the bond, you will need to go to Nkira Peak, where the veil between the human and spirit worlds is thinnest. There, you must summon the spirit guardians and plead your case. Obinna's heart sank. Nkira Peak was feared by all in Ufumaka. It was said to be home to restless spirits and dangerous creatures. I will go, he said, though his voice was barely a whisper. Good, Na Aqua said, placing a hand on his shoulder. But remember, Obinna, Obinna will not let you go without a fight. She will try to stop you at every turn. You must remain strong. As Obinna left the elder's compound, the weight of his task settled on him. The path ahead was unclear, but one thing was certain, the battle for his freedom had begun. The sun hung high as Obinna made his way back to his hut, the elder's words ringing in his ears. He clutched the small ikna tightly, feeling its rough edges bite into his palm. Though the path ahead was daunting, he resolved to see it through. He would not live as a prisoner to Obinna's wrath. But as dusk approached, an unease settled over the village. The air grew heavy, and the birds fell silent. By the time Obinna reached his compound, the sky had turned an eerie shade of orange, as though fire lingered just beyond the horizon. Obinna stopped in his tracks. He could feel her. "You think you can leave me?" The voice came from everywhere and nowhere, sending a shiver down his spine. He turned sharply, his eyes darting across the empty yard. Shadows seemed to shift and writhe, forming shapes that disappeared as quickly as they came. "You are mine, Obinna," Amina's voice whispered again, closer now. "No one else will have you." Obinna gritted his teeth, gripping the Aikna tighter. "I will not be your prisoner anymore," he shouted into the emptiness. "You cannot control me." The wind rose suddenly, swirling dust and leaves around him. From the center of the storm, Amina appeared, her white gown glowing in the dim light. Her beauty was as dazzling as it was terrifying. Her eyes, however, were filled with fury. "You dare defy me," she hissed, stepping closer. "I dare to be free," Obinna replied, his voice shaking but resolute. Amina laughed, a sound like shattering glass. "Free? There is no freedom for you, my love. You were given to me willingly, and I have kept my part of the bargain. Your family prospered because of me. Do you think you can repay that debt with mere words?" Obinna felt a wave of anger rise within him. "I never asked for your blessings. I was a child. My parents made that choice, not me." "Yet you benefited," Amina countered, her smile sharp as a blade. "You ate from the bounty I provided. You walked the path I cleared for you. And now, you think you can walk away?" Before Obinna could respond, the ground beneath him trembled. From the shadows, spectral forms emerged, women, their faces gaunt and their eyes hollow. They reached for him, their skeletal hands clawing at the air. "These are the ones who dared to love you," Amina said coldly, gesturing to the spirits. "Chika, Amara, Ifioma. Each one thought they could take what is mine. Look at them now." Obinna's heart pounded as the spirits moved closer. Their whispers filled his ears, "Save us, break the bond, free us from her." He stepped back, clutching the Aikna. "I will end this," he said, his voice trembling but determined. "I will free them. I will free myself." Amina's expression darkened. With a flick of her wrist, the wind intensified, knocking Obinna to the ground. The Aikna slipped from his grasp, landing a few feet away. "You will do nothing," she said, her voice like thunder. "You belong to me, Obinna. And I will not let you go." Obinna struggled to his feet, his eyes locking onto the Aikna. He lunged for it, but as his fingers closed around the carving, Amina's form expanded, her gown billowing like storm clouds. "You think that talisman will save you?" she sneered. "Foolish man. The spirits of Nkiru Peak will devour you before you even reach them." Obinna stood, clutching the Aikna to his chest. "If that is the price of freedom, I will pay it." For a moment, Amina seemed taken aback, her eyes narrowing. Then she smiled, a chilling expression that sent a wave of dread through him. "Very well," she said, her voice soft but venomous. "Go, Obinna. Seek your freedom. But know this, the path to Nkiru Peak is not for the faint of heart. You will face trials that will break your body and your spirit. And when you fail, I will be waiting." With that, she vanished, her laughter echoing in the still night. Obinna stood alone, the wind dying down around him. He knew she wasn't bluffing. The journey ahead would test him in ways he couldn't yet imagine. But as he looked at the Eigna in his hand, he felt a flicker of hope. He would not give up. As the first stars appeared in the sky, Obinna began to pack for his journey. He gathered his strongest sandals, a water pouch, and a small bag of food. Before leaving, he knelt by his mat and whispered a prayer to the ancestors. "Guide me," he said. "Give me strength to face what lies ahead." As he stepped out of his hut, the village lay quiet and still. But deep in the shadows, unseen eyes watched him. The journey to Nkuru Peak had begun. The first light of dawn broke over Ufumaka as Obinna stepped onto the narrow dirt path leading out of the village. The silence of the early morning was broken only by the chirping of crickets and the occasional hoot of an owl returning to its nest. Obinna paused at the edge of the village, glancing back at the place he had called home. The familiar huts, the lush fields, and the towering irako tree at the center of the village all seemed distant now, as if they belonged to another life. He tightened his grip on the Eigna in his hand and whispered, "I will return. And when I do, this curse will be broken." The path ahead wound through dense forests, rocky hills, and the feared lands near Nkuru Peak. The stories of those who had ventured there were grim, some returned with minds shattered, while others never came back. But Obinna pushed those thoughts aside. His resolve burned stronger than his fear. By midday, Obinna reached the entrance to the Forest of Echoes, a place where even the bravest hunters tread carefully. The forest was dense, with towering trees that blotted out the sunlight. Vines hung like serpents, and the air smelled of damp earth and decay. As he stepped into the forest, the silence was overwhelming. No birds chirped, no leaves rustled. The only sound was the crunch of his sandals against the forest floor. "Obinna." He froze. The voice was faint but unmistakable, it was Amina's. "Turn back," it whispered, soft as a breeze. "This journey will bring you nothing but pain." Obinna ignored it and pressed on, his eyes scanning the path ahead. But with every step, the whispers grew louder, overlapping, as if 100 voices were speaking at once. "Obinna, why do you leave me? Do you think you can escape? You are mine forever." The voices swirled around him, tugging at his mind. He covered his ears, but the sound seemed to seep into his very thoughts. "Enough," he shouted, his voice echoing through the forest. The whispers stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie stillness. Obinna's heart pounded as he lowered his hands. Ahead, the path split into 3, each route shrouded in shadows. He knelt and placed the Eigna before him. "Guide me," he whispered. A faint light glimmered from the carving, pointing toward the middle path. Obinna hesitated for only a moment before following it. The middle path led him deeper into the forest, where the air grew colder, and the trees seemed to close in around him. Suddenly, a massive figure emerged from the shadows, a creature with the body of a man but the head of a leopard. Its eyes glowed yellow, and its claws glistened like polished steel. "Who dares enter my domain?" the creature growled, its voice rumbling like thunder. "I am Obinna of Ufumaka," he said, his voice steady despite the fear clawing at him. "I seek freedom from a curse that binds me." The creature studied him, its eyes narrowing. Many have come through this forest seeking freedom, wealth, or power. Few survive. What makes you think you will? I have no choice, Obinna replied. I must break this bond, not just for myself, but for those I have harmed. The creature tilted its head, as if weighing his words. Very well, it said finally. But to pass through my forest, you must answer a question. Fail, and you will not leave this place alive. Obinna nodded, his palms sweating. Ask your question. The creature's voice grew softer, almost hypnotic. What is greater than the gods, more evil than the spirits, poorer than the poorest man, and richer than the richest king? Obinna's mind raced. He had heard riddles like this before, but his fear threatened to cloud his thoughts. He closed his eyes, focusing on the words. Greater than the gods, he whispered. More evil than the spirits. Suddenly, the answer struck him. He opened his eyes and looked directly at the creature. Nothing, he said. The answer is nothing. The creature let out a low growl that reverberated through the forest. For a moment, Obinna thought he had answered incorrectly. But then the growl softened into what sounded like laughter. You are wise, the creature said. You may pass. It stepped aside, revealing a faint trail that led deeper into the forest. Obinna bowed slightly before continuing, the weight of his first trial lifting from his shoulders. As the forest thinned and the trees gave way to rocky terrain, Obinna felt a strange warmth on his skin. He turned to see a figure standing at the edge of the forest, Obinna. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes glimmered with a mix of anger and sorrow. You think you've won, don't you? She said, her voice carrying effortlessly over the distance. This is only the beginning, she continued. The trials ahead will break you, Obinna. And when you fail, I will still be here, waiting for you. Obinna met her gaze, his resolve unwavering. I will not fail, he said. Obinna's smile was cold. We shall see. She disappeared into the shadows, leaving Obinna alone once more. As the sun began to set, Obinna climbed the rocky path ahead, his destination drawing closer. But he knew Obinna's words were not idle threats. The journey to Nkiru Peak would test every part of him, his body, his mind, and his spirit. And the real battle had yet to begin. By the time Obinna emerged from the forest of echoes, the sun was setting behind the distant mountains, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold. Before him lay the Valley of the Forgotten, a barren expanse dotted with jagged rocks and swirling mists. It was a place the elders of Ufumaka often spoke of in hushed tones, a land where lost souls wandered, forgotten by both the living and the dead. Obinna paused at the edge of the valley, clutching the Aikna tightly. He could feel the air change, heavy with sorrow and despair. The cries of unseen spirits floated on the wind, tugging at his resolve. This is the price of freedom, he murmured to himself, stepping into the valley. As Obinna ventured deeper, the mist thickened, wrapping around him like a living thing. The whispers began softly at first, faint and indistinct. But as he walked, they grew louder, clearer, and more insistent. Obinna, why did you leave us? Do you not remember us? You cannot escape what you have done. The voices were familiar, each one belonging to someone he had loved and lost. Obinna stopped, his breath quickening. Ahead, the mist parted to reveal spectral figures, women he recognized instantly. There was Chica, her once bright eyes now filled with sorrow. Beside her stood Amara, her face gaunt and pale, and Iphioma, her delicate hands clutching at her chest as if in pain. "Why did you abandon us?" Chica asked, her voice trembling with accusation. "I didn't abandon you," Obinna said, his voice breaking. "I didn't want this to happen. Amina, she did this to you. She only acted because of you," Amara said, stepping closer. "You gave yourself to her. You brought this upon us." Obinna fell to his knees, the weight of their words pressing down on him. "I never wanted any of this," he whispered. "I was just a boy. I didn't know what my parents had done." "Excuses," Iphioma spat, her voice sharp as a blade. "You shared your bed with us, knowing the danger. You condemned us to this fate." Obinna's chest tightened as guilt threatened to consume him. The specters loomed closer, their voices blending into a chorus of sorrow and anger. But then, a faint warmth radiated from the ichna in his hand. Obinna looked down at the carving, its glow cutting through the mist. He remembered Na-Ukwa's words, "You must remain strong." He rose to his feet, his grip on the ichna firm. "I will not be broken by guilt," he said, his voice steady. "What happened to you was wrong, but I am here to make it right. I will break this curse, not just for me, but for all of you." The spirits hesitated, their forms flickering like dying flames. Chica stepped forward, her expression softening. "If you fail, we will remain here forever," she said. "Do not let our suffering be in vain." "I won't," Obinna vowed. The specters faded into the mist, their whispers growing faint until they were gone. The valley grew quiet once more, and Obinna felt a weight lift from his heart. As he pressed on, Obinna encountered a massive stone archway at the center of the valley. Strange symbols were etched into the rock, glowing faintly in the twilight. Standing beneath the arch was a figure draped in tattered robes, its face obscured by a hood. "Traveler," the figure said, its voice echoing unnaturally. "You have entered the Valley of the Forgotten. None pass through without confronting their past. Have you faced your ghosts?" "I have," Obinna replied, his voice firm. The figure stepped closer, its movements slow and deliberate. "And what have you learned?" "I have learned that guilt and fear are chains," Obinna said. "But I will not let them bind me. I will break free, no matter the cost." The hooded figure was silent for a moment before nodding. "Your resolve is strong, but the path ahead is treacherous. Take this." It held out a small leather pouch. Obinna hesitated before taking it, feeling its surprising weight. "What is this?" he asked. "The ashes of the forgotten," the figure said. "They will guide you when the darkness grows too thick. But beware, ashes burn as easily as they illuminate." Obinna nodded and tucked the pouch into his bag. "Thank you." The figure stepped aside, allowing him to pass through the archway. As he crossed, the mists parted, revealing the steep incline of Nkuru Peak in the distance. "You are stronger than most," the figure said from behind him. "But strength alone will not save you. Remember that." Obinna turned to respond, but the figure was gone, leaving only the swirling mist behind. The journey through the valley had drained Obinna, but as he stood at the base of Nkuru Peak, a renewed determination filled him. The peak loomed high above, its jagged cliffs shrouded in dark clouds. Lightning flashed across the summit, illuminating the path ahead, a narrow trail that twisted and turned up the mountainside. Obinna took a deep breath and began the ascent. The air grew colder with every step, and the wind howled like a chorus of anguished spirits. The Aikna felt warm in his hand, its glow faint but constant. As night fell, Obinna paused to rest on a rocky ledge. He gazed up at the summit, barely visible through the swirling clouds. The journey was far from over, but for the first time, he felt hope. Amina's shadow still lingered, but her power over him was weakening. He could feel it in the way the air seemed lighter, in the way his thoughts no longer felt clouded by her voice. He would reach the peak. He would summon the spirit guardians. And he would be free. Obinna awoke to the faint glow of dawn breaking through the clouds. The night had been restless, filled with strange dreams, and the sensation of unseen eyes watching him. He sat up on the rocky ledge where he had rested, gazing at the path that wound ever upward toward Nkuru Peak. The mountain loomed like a towering sentinel, its cliffs jagged and unyielding. Lightning flashed intermittently at the summit, accompanied by the low rumble of thunder. Obinna felt a knot of anxiety in his chest but pushed it aside. He had come too far to turn back. Clutching the Aikna, he began his ascent once more, the cold mountain air biting at his skin. Each step felt heavier than the last, as though the mountain itself resisted his progress. As Obinna climbed higher, he began to hear faint cries carried on the wind. They were soft at first, barely distinguishable from the howling gusts. But soon, the cries grew louder, filling the air with a haunting chorus. Obinna! Obinna! The voices were mournful, filled with a deep sorrow that seemed to seep into his bones. Obinna paused, his heart pounding. The cries echoed all around him, impossible to pinpoint. "Who are you?" he called out, his voice trembling. The wind answered with a gust that nearly knocked him off his feet. As he steadied himself, the cries faded, replaced by a single voice, a voice he recognized. Obinna. It was Chika's voice, soft and filled with pain. "Why do you run from me?" she asked, her voice drifting on the wind. "I'm not running," Obinna said, his grip tightening on the Aikna. "I'm trying to free you. To free all of you. Free us," the voice repeated, now laced with bitterness. "How can you free us when you cannot even free yourself?" Obinna's chest tightened, but he forced himself to keep moving. The voice followed him, growing louder with each step. "You betrayed us, Obinna. You brought death to everyone you touched. Do you think you can simply erase that?" The words struck like a blade, reopening wounds he thought had begun to heal. But he pressed on, focusing on the trail ahead. The voices might haunt him, but they would not stop him. By midday, Obinna reached a plateau near the summit. In the center stood a massive stone gate, intricately carved with symbols of the ancestors. The gate shimmered faintly, as if alive, and a sense of foreboding hung in the air. Obinna approached cautiously, his heart pounding. As he neared the gate, the air grew heavy, and the ground beneath him seemed to hum with energy. A deep voice boomed from the gate. "Who seeks passage to the peak of Nkuru?" "I am Obinna of Ufumaka," he said, his voice steady despite his fear. "I seek the spirit guardians to break the curse that binds me." The gate pulsed with light, and the voice spoke again. To pass, you must face 3 trials, the trial of truth, the trial of sacrifice, and the trial of spirit. Do you accept? I do, Obinna replied, his resolve unwavering. The gate shimmered once more before slowly opening, revealing a narrow path that led further up the mountain. The first trial awaited him just beyond the gate, a small clearing surrounded by jagged rocks. In the center stood a pool of crystal-clear water. Obinna approached cautiously, feeling a strange energy emanating from the pool. As he gazed into the water, the surface began to ripple, and an image appeared. It was a scene from his past, him as a boy, playing near the river with his parents. They laughed and smiled, their joy infectious. But then the scene darkened. Obinna saw his father kneeling before a shrine, offering gifts to a figure that shimmered with otherworldly light. It was Amina. You were given to me, Amina's voice echoed, her figure turning to face the young boy in the vision. From the moment you were born, you were mine. Obinna clenched his fists, his heart heavy with anger and betrayal. They had no right to give me away, he said aloud. The pool shimmered, and another scene appeared. This time, it was Obinna as a young man, sharing a meal with Chica under the moonlight. They laughed and talked, unaware of the shadow watching them from the trees. Moments later, the scene shifted to Chica lying lifeless, her once bright eyes dull and empty. Your choices brought death, the voice said, cold and unyielding. You must face the truth, you cannot escape your past. Obinna felt tears well up in his eyes, but he forced himself to speak. I cannot change what has happened, he said, his voice trembling. But I will not let my past define me. I will make amends, even if it costs me everything. The pool glowed brightly before going still, its surface smooth and clear once more. A faint warmth spread through Obinna's chest, and he knew he had passed the first trial. The path led him to a second clearing, where a solitary figure awaited him. It was Na Ukwo, his mentor, seated on a wooden stool. Obinna, Na Ukwo said, his voice calm but grave. To break the curse, you must give up that which you hold most dear. Obinna's brow furrowed. What do you mean? Na Ukwo gestured to the small pouch tied to Obinna's waist, the ashes of the forgotten. Those ashes hold the power to protect you in your darkest hour. But now, you must surrender them. Obinna hesitated. The pouch had been his guide, a beacon of hope in his darkest moments. Without it, the journey ahead would be even more perilous. But he knew what he had to do. Unfastening the pouch, he held it out to Na Ukwo. If this is the price of freedom, I will pay it. Na Ukwo nodded, taking the pouch and disappearing into the mist. Obinna felt a pang of loss but also a strange sense of relief. As Obinna approached the final trial, the air grew colder, and the ground beneath him began to tremble. A massive stone figure rose before him, its eyes glowing with fiery light. To pass, you must prove the strength of your spirit, the figure rumbled. How? Obinna asked. The figure raised a hand, and the ground split open, revealing a chasm filled with darkness. From within the depths, tendrils of shadow reached out, clawing at Obinna's feet. Step into the chasm, the figure commanded. Obinna hesitated, fear gripping his heart. The darkness seemed alive, hungry. But he took a deep breath, clutching the Aikna. I will not be afraid, he said, stepping into the void. The shadows enveloped him, pulling him into darkness. But even as the cold seeped into his bones, he felt a warmth within, a light that pushed back the darkness. It was his resolve, his spirit burning bright. When the shadows receded, Obinna found himself standing at the summit of Nkira Peak, the storm clouds parting to reveal the spirit guardians. They shimmered with an ethereal light, their voices harmonizing like 1,000 winds. You have proven yourself, Obinna. Speak your wish. Obinna fell to his knees, tears streaming down his face. Free me from Amina's grasp. Free the women she has harmed. Let their spirits find peace. The guardians extended their hands, their light enveloping him. The bond that had chained him for so long began to unravel, Amina's power breaking like a shattered mirror. At last, Obinna felt truly free. As the spirit guardian's light enveloped Obinna, he felt a powerful force coursing through his body, stripping away the invisible chains that had bound him to Amina. The oppressive weight that had clung to him for years lifted, leaving him trembling with a mixture of relief and exhaustion. But the mountain was not silent. A furious scream pierced the air, shaking the very ground beneath him. The sky darkened as storm clouds gathered once more, and a chilling wind swept through the peak. Obinna turned to see a figure materializing from the shadows, a towering, ethereal form cloaked in a swirling black mist. It was Amina, her eyes glowing red with rage. You dare defy me, she roared, her voice reverberating like thunder. After all I have given you? After all the lives I claimed in your name? Obinna stepped forward, his fear replaced by a newfound courage. You gave me nothing but pain, he said, his voice steady. And you will hurt no one else. Your hold over me is broken. Amina's laughter was cold and hollow. You think the spirit guardians can protect you? She raised her hand, and the shadows around her twisted into monstrous forms, beasts with glowing eyes and sharp claws. You belong to me, Obinna. You always will. The spirit guardians surrounded Obinna, their light clashing against Amina's darkness. The air crackled with energy as the two forces collided, sending shockwaves across the peak. Stand firm, child, the guardians said, their voices resonating in his mind. Her power is great, but your spirit is stronger. Amina unleashed her shadow beasts, which charged at Obinna with terrifying speed. He gripped the Aikna, feeling its warmth radiate through him. With a deep breath, he raised the carving high, and a beam of light shot forth, striking the nearest beast. It disintegrated with a howl, but more took its place. You cannot fight them all. Amina taunted, her voice dripping with malice. Obinna closed his eyes, centering himself. He remembered the trials he had faced, the lessons he had learned. The Aikna was a symbol, but the true strength lay within him. When he opened his eyes, they glowed faintly with the light of the guardians. He thrust his hand forward, and a wave of energy erupted from his body, pushing the beasts back. The ground beneath them cracked, and the shadows began to waver. As the battle raged on, Amina's form began to flicker. She screamed in frustration, her voice losing its commanding tone. You think you can destroy me, Obinna, she hissed. I was here long before you, long before your ancestors. I am eternal. Eternity doesn't justify your cruelty, Obinna shot back. You preyed on the weak, took what wasn't yours, and destroyed innocent lives. Your time is over. For the first time, a hint of fear crossed Obinna's face. Her form wavered, and the shadows around her began to dissipate. The spirit guardians spoke, their voices calm but firm. Obinna, your reign has ended. You were once a spirit of balance, a protector of the land. But greed and vengeance consumed you. Now, you must return to the void. No. Obinna screamed, her form shrinking as the guardian's light surrounded her. I will not be forgotten. I will not. Her words were cut off as the light engulfed her completely, reducing her to a wisp of smoke that faded into the wind. The storm clouds parted, revealing a clear sky. The mountain grew silent, the air heavy with a sense of finality. Obinna fell to his knees, overwhelmed by the weight of what had just transpired. The spirit guardians stood before him, their forms glowing softly. You have done well, Obinna, they said. The curse is broken, and the spirits of the women harmed by Obinna will now find peace. Thank you, Obinna whispered, tears streaming down his face. The guardians nodded, their forms beginning to fade. Your journey is not yet over. Return to your people and share what you have learned. The strength of a spirit lies not in power, but in love, truth, and sacrifice. With those final words, the spirit guardians vanished, leaving Obinna alone on the peak. The descent from Guru Peak was long and arduous, but Obinna felt lighter with every step. By the time he reached the valley, the air was filled with the songs of birds and the rustling of leaves, signs of life returning to the once cursed land. When he finally arrived in Ufumaka, the villagers gathered around him, their eyes wide with curiosity and awe. Obinna recounted his journey, the trials, the guardians, and the final confrontation with Obinna. The elders listened intently, their expressions a mix of wonder and respect. You have done what no one else could, one of them said. You have freed us from a great evil. In the days that followed, Obinna worked tirelessly to rebuild his life. He sought out the families of the women who had suffered because of him, offering his apologies and whatever aid he could provide. Though the scars of the past would never fully fade, he found solace in the knowledge that he was no longer bound by Obinna's curse. Years later, Obinna stood beneath the towering irako tree at the center of the village, watching children play and laughter fill the air. He held the aikna in his hands, its surface worn but still warm to the touch. He had learned that true freedom came not from running from one's past, but from confronting it head-on. And though the journey had been painful, it had made him stronger, wiser, and more compassionate. As the sun set over Ufumaka, Obinna looked up at the sky, a peaceful smile on his face. Obinna's shadow no longer lingered. He was free. And for the first time in his life, he felt whole.